If there was ever a man whose actions forever outweighed everything else about him, it was Benedict Arnold. A key character of the American Revolution, Benedict was clever and ambitious, always rising through the ranks of the American Continental Army. When he received command of the important military post, West Point, his leadership was abysmal, and he intentionally diminished supplies, leading the fort into disarray. His men believed that he was selling it all on the black market, but the truth was far more treacherous. Born in 1741 in Norwich, Connecticut, of his parents' 6 children, only he and his sister survived to reach adulthood. With this rough start in life, things had not been easy. His father's thriving business had allowed them to live a prosperous lifestyle, but the loss of most of their children was rough on the family, and his father turned to drinking, draining much of their wealth. To help the young Benedict, his mother was able to secure him an apprenticeship with her cousin's apothecary. However, this endeavor was rather unexciting for a young man, and with the 7 Years' War beginning in the 1750s between Britain and France, Benedict, at only 16 years old, enlisted in the Connecticut Provincial Militia. As soon as he joined up with the militia, he was swept off to Lake George in New York to defend Fort William Henry from France. However, before they could arrive, news arrived that the French had taken the fort from the British. As a result, the militia were no longer needed, and Benedict was dismissed after not even 2 weeks in the service. Although short, this experience would serve him well later on. Due to his family's trying circumstances, both Benedict's parents soon passed, leaving Benedict quite alone by 1761. With nothing else to do, he continued on with his apprenticeship. Things went well working for his relative's apothecary, and they even helped him set up his own business. By 1762, he set up his own shop in New Haven, Connecticut, selling books and continuing the apothecary trade. Despite his burgeoning business and career, big geopolitical changes were occurring that would change his life forever. The British government had been making moves in raging the American colonies and bringing them to the point of rebellion. As a businessman, things like the 1765 Stamp Act radicalized Benedict enough to protest against British taxation by joining the Sons of Liberty, a revolutionary organization. Like many did at the time, Benedict joined the local Masonic Lodge, becoming familiar with New Haven's sheriff, Samuel Mansfield. He became quite close to Mansfield's daughter, Margaret, and the two would be married in February 1767, going on to have 3 sons in quick succession. With his prior experience in the Connecticut militia, the American Revolution brought Benedict a new opportunity for service with American forces, as he was swiftly elected to the rank of captain in 1775. With the battles of Lexington and Concord, the conflict began in earnest, and Benedict and his company left Connecticut to aid the army in the siege of Boston. Benedict was ambitious and constantly strived to rise through the ranks, usually through the glory of battle. Upon learning of Fort Ticonderoga's poor defenses, he proposed its seizure to the Massachusetts Committee of Safety. They agreed and commissioned him as a colonel, tasking him with taking the fort. Riding off to upstate New York, Benedict led his men to victory when they took Fort Ticonderoga. However, it was a bittersweet win, as his wife passed away while he was gone, with news only reaching him as he was returning to Connecticut. Despite his loss, circumstances of the war dictated that he return to action soon. Benedict proposed to the Second Continental Congress a bold new idea: invade the British territory of Quebec, to which they agreed. However, he was disappointed when they gave General Montgomery command of the expedition instead of him. Undeterred and still thirsting for glory, he approached George Washington himself and proposed a second expedition against Quebec through the wilderness. Washington agreed. Benedict, now a colonel in the Continental Army, took a force of 1,100 men to Quebec on his planned route through the wilderness. However, the conditions were rough, with 300 of his men turning back and 200 perishing on the way. By the time they finally arrived, they were without cannons and facing a fortified city garrisoned by hundreds of British regulars and local militia. Joining up with General Montgomery, the two forces launched their attack despite the odds, and to very poor results. Hundreds of men were killed or taken prisoner, and it was a major defeat for the Continental Army. General Montgomery was killed in battle, and Benedict sustained a severe injury to his leg. Although things had not gone as planned, his initiative did not go unnoticed. Following the failed battle, the higher-ups honored his efforts and granted him the rank of Brigadier General. With his new rank, he received even more responsibility and formed strong friendships with several notable generals, such as Horatio Gates, Philip Schuyler, and even George Washington. Yet, despite his accomplishments, he began to feel a sense of bitterness. By 1777, his name and reputation began to precede him, and he believed he was due for another promotion. But when he discovered that Congress had chosen someone else to be promoted to the rank of Major General instead of him, he was so upset he penned his resignation. Washington refused it, making Benedict even more desperate to prove himself. Benedict decided to travel all the way to Philadelphia to make his case for a promotion. However, well on the way, he heard that the British were attempting to take a supply depot in Danbury. He quickly gathered up a militia with a couple other generals and met the British in battle. The raid was not a success, and Benedict actually injured his leg yet again. However, Congress was impressed with his actions and did end up promoting him to Major General. Although this was what he had originally wanted, Benedict did not accept the promotion happily. Although it seems petty, he was unhappy that Congress hadn't reinstated his seniority over the officers promoted before him. During the two battles of Saratoga in 1777, Benedict's bitterness and hostility began rising to the surface. So much so that General Gates had removed him from command for his defiance. Benedict ignored his orders and led his men during the second battle. During this engagement, he actually injured his leg for a third time, the very same leg twice injured already. The doctors recommended surgery, a risky business in the 1700s, and something that also came with several months of recovery. Benedict refused and had his leg crudely set instead, resulting in his left leg being 2 inches shorter than his right leg, and causing him pain for the rest of his life. Ironically, Benedict's disobedience of orders and leadership in battle actually became an integral stepping stone to American victory that day. To commemorate this, Congress mended his previous grievances and restored his command superiority over his peers, exactly like he wanted. But despite all this, Benedict still remained bitter, believing that they had only done this out of pity for his injury. In 1778, Benedict received a very important appointment in response to Britain's departure from Philadelphia. In what would be considered one of the worst decisions of Washington's career, he made Benedict the commander of the city. With his new position of power in Philadelphia, Benedict enjoyed a lavish lifestyle and became acquainted with many of the city's most affluent residents. One of these was 18-year-old Peggy Shippen, a judge's daughter, who came from a family of Loyalist sympathizers. After a year-long courtship, the two married in April 1779. Despite his position in government, and even with a new love in his life, Benedict always harbored a chip on his shoulder. He had lost his business several years before, he'd been seriously injured, and also passed over for promotion several times. Benedict soon discovered something shocking about his new wife, Peggy. Although there were military bans on communication with the enemy, Peggy had a group of friends who found methods of staying in contact with love interests and friends across the battle lines. By 1779, Peggy was no longer the only Loyalist sympathizer in his life, and the idea of secretly aiding the British had become much more appealing. Soon enough, Benedict began corresponding with the British spy chief, John Andre, writing letters in code and invisible ink, and using Peggy and her circle of women as messengers. Over the next few months, Benedict carried on his secret correspondence with Andre, and eventually the British general, Sir Henry Clinton. He included more and more sensitive information, and all the while negotiating how much the British could pay him in exchange. In 1780, Benedict had the opportunity to take on a new position of even greater command and responsibility when General Schuyler considered giving him command of the West Point Army Post. He wrote General Clinton telling him of the offer, and as soon as the decision was final, Benedict had a disturbing new deal in mind: surrender the entire West Point base to them in exchange for compensation. That summer, Benedict received command of West Point. Little did the men under his command know, but he fully intended to use his new post to serve the British. Continuing his negotiations with General Clinton, he was given an offer of £20,000 to hand over the base. Although Benedict had come up with the £20,000 figure himself, he had also requested compensation for his previous losses, to which General Clinton refused. Nonetheless, Benedict accepted the general's final offer, and in the meantime, Benedict did everything he could to fail at his job. If Benedict's men at West Point didn't suspect him of treachery, they likely thought he was just a terrible commander. He ignored repairs that were necessary, he incompetently spread out his forces, and he intentionally diminished their supplies, leading his men to believe that he was selling them on the black market. It's likely that if his men knew what Benedict was really up to, they would be furious. In September, Benedict and the British spy Andre spoke face to face for the first time, with Andre having traveled all the way to Benedict. Afterward, he had planned to take a ship back to New York, but the ship was damaged in an attack and not available. Andre now had no choice but to travel back by land. This ended up being a huge mistake, as during his journey, he was captured by American militiamen. Although he tried to talk his way out, it was no use. The militia searched him and found papers containing the detailed British plans, including the surrender of West Point from Benedict himself. The next day, Benedict received word of Andre's capture. Naturally, he began to panic, but couldn't show it, as he was about to have breakfast with George Washington, who was on his way. He was soon informed that the documents taken from Andre were currently on their way to Washington, who would then find out everything. Benedict did what he thought best and chose to flee. He immediately ordered his bargemen to take him downriver to the anchored HMS Vulture, where he found passage to New York in safety among the British. Now, on the British side of the line, Benedict wanted to speak for himself and explain his actions. In an open letter titled, "To the Inhabitants of America," he excused his actions as a response to the perceived corruption in Congress, a belief that America should give up the conflict, and his rejection of the Declaration of Independence. Benedict had now officially committed treason and become a turncoat. The British rewarded him by commissioning him as a brigadier general. However, this posting wasn't exactly what he had asked for, and the £20,000 that he had been promised never came, as he technically never handed over West Point. The British nonetheless paid him £6,135, with an annual pension of £360. Although he was disappointed, there was no turning back now. On the American side, Washington was furious, and had no feelings of mercy after Benedict had published his open letter. By late 1781, the war was not going well for the British, and Benedict knew his time had come to leave the colonies. After the surrender of General Cornwallis at Yorktown, Benedict said goodbye to America, and he and his wife and family set sail for England in December 1781. Although the British government had rewarded Benedict for his defection, he was quick to learn that many in England remained suspicious of him, and in some cases even criticized his actions as dishonorable. Benedict ended up returning to his old trade, being a merchant. He worked for some time to various success, while he and his family continued subsisting on his pension. As time went on, Benedict's health declined and limited his abilities. His wounded leg constantly ached, and his other suffered from gout. Eventually, he was diagnosed with edema and ordered to take some time in the countryside, where he died in 1801. Although Benedict Arnold was undoubtedly a traitor, it is possible that later on he regretted his actions. According to some, before he passed, Benedict stated that he wanted to die while wearing his old American uniform. Although he had given many reasons as to why he betrayed his country in his open letter, historians continue to debate what exactly made him a turncoat? Well, resentment and ambition definitely played a part. Many now believe that it might have come down to his loyalist wife. It's no secret that many people do crazy things out of love, and it's entirely possible that Benedict did what he did out of love for his wife. Thanks for watching History Exposé. If you love uncovering the best stories in history, hit like and subscribe to keep exploring with us. Don't forget to visit our main page, Factinate, for more incredible facts about everything.